All right, today we're tackling something that sounds, well, impossible. We're talking about measuring the unmeasurable. How in the world do you put a number on something as personal as faith? It sounds crazy, right? But believe it or not, a team of researchers actually tried to do it. They wanted to build a real scientific tool to quantify belief. So let's dive in and see how they pulled it off.
So, yeah, this is the big one. This is the question that started this whole journey. Can you really put a number on faith? I mean, think about it. How do you take something so deeply personal, so spiritual, and stick it on a scale? It just feels like something you can't measure, you know?
But here's the thing, and this is why it's so important. Our beliefs aren't just these abstract thoughts floating around in our heads. They actually influence everything we do. I'm talking about real, everyday decisions, like the food you buy at the grocery store or even the bank you decide to trust with your money. And this is especially true for a huge portion of the world. The researchers specifically looked at Muslim consumers, pointing out that for them, Islam isn't just something you think about on a holy day. It's a total way of life. It's woven into the fabric of everything. So, if you want to understand this massive group of consumers, you absolutely have to understand the role their faith plays. Okay, so that brings us right to the big challenge. The problem was there wasn't a good tool for this. Nothing standardized or reliable that could specifically measure Islamic religiosity, especially when it comes to why people buy what they buy. So, what do you do when the tool you need doesn't exist? Well, you've got to build it yourself, from scratch. So, where do you even begin a project that big? You start by looking at what other people have already tried to do, right? The researchers went on this huge deep dive, a kind of academic treasure hunt, sifting through decades of research to find every single attempt anyone had ever made to measure faith.
And just look at the scale of this thing. We're talking about combing through 5 different academic databases. They started with more than 450 studies. From that giant pile, they had to painstakingly filter everything down, looking for the absolute best, most relevant research, and ended up with just 27 articles. Talk about finding a needle in a haystack. Now, from those 27 articles, they extracted every single question, or item, which is the nerdy term for it, that had ever been used to try and measure religiosity, and what they ended up with was, well, a mountain of data. A starting list of 239 different questions.
Okay, so they had their raw material, but a giant list of 239 questions isn't a useful tool, right? It's just a big pile of stuff. The next part of the process was all about taking that raw material and forging it into something precise, something strong. And that, my friends, takes some serious, serious work. And they didn't just wing it. They had a really methodical, multi-step process. First, they gathered all 239 items in one place. Then, and this is key, they brought in 12 Islamic scholars and academics to review every single one. After that, they used a cool technique called Q sorting, which is basically having judges sort the questions into piles to see which ones are clear and which are confusing. And finally, they brought out the big guns, some heavy-duty statistical analysis to figure out which questions were actually the most powerful and precise. Okay, so let's watch how this incredible funnel works. They started with that huge number, 239 initial items. Right away, just by getting rid of duplicates and cleaning up the wording on some confusing questions, boom, they were down to 105. Then, the panel of experts weighed in. They were super strict, only keeping items that more than 95% of them agreed were relevant. And just like that, the list shrinks to 41. And finally, after all the statistical crunching was done, what was left? The absolute best of the best. 16 final items. I mean, think about that journey, from 239 all the way down to just 16. That's what rigor looks like. Now, for a minute there, with those 41 items, they thought they had it sorted into 5 different categories, things like beliefs, commitment, practice, and so on. But it was still a little messy. How do you clearly separate commitment from practice? There's a lot of overlap, and that can make your measurements fuzzy. And this is where they had that aha moment. The key to making the tool even better, even more powerful, wasn't to add more complexity. It was to simplify. They realized that all those 5 categories could actually be boiled down, merged perfectly into just 2 core ideas. This was the breakthrough that made everything click into place. And here we have it, the final, elegant result of all that incredible work. The whole complex, messy idea of religiosity could be clearly and effectively measured by looking at just two things, two pillars, beliefs and commitment.
So what are these two pillars really? Well, beliefs, or iman, is pretty straightforward. It's the what you believe part, the core ideas and principles. And commitment, or amasole, is the what you do part. It's all about how much you put those beliefs into practice in your everyday life. And what's really cool is that the researchers found these two ideas are almost always paired together in the Quran, which was a huge validation that they were on the right track.
So let's actually look at the questions themselves, okay? First up, here are the 6 items that measure beliefs. As you can see, they get right to the point. They're about the absolute core tenets, the foundational principles of the faith, and how things like scripture and tradition fit into today's world.
And then we have the 9 items for commitment and practice. And you can see right away, these are all about action. It's not just about what you believe, it's about how that belief shows up in the real world. We're talking tangible choices, like what you buy, how you dress, your daily prayers and rituals, basically your entire approach to life.
So there you have it. After that whole intense process, they have a 16-question scale that is scientifically solid. It's tested, it's validated, but the big question is, so what? What does a tool like this actually do for us in the real world? What does it unlock? Because, let's be clear, this was never meant to just sit in a dusty academic journal. The whole point from the very beginning was to create something useful, something with real-world impact.
And this is where it becomes a real game changer. For the first time ever, you have businesses, banks, marketers, you name it, who now have a reliable, scientific way to actually understand how faith drives the decisions of their Muslim customers. This means they can create products that are a better fit, services that are more relevant, and just communicate in a way that truly connects.
What this whole thing really proves is that it's possible. It's possible to build a scientific bridge into understanding some of the deepest, most personal parts of who we are. And that leaves us with a pretty huge question to think about, doesn't it? If we can find a way to scientifically measure faith, what's next? What other core parts of being human are we going to learn to understand in a whole new way?